Hi, I just wanted to share a few of the mods I've made to my second printer, which is a Monoprice Mini Select. Quite a nice printer for the money and very amenable to making modifications to it. So I'll see if I can remember all the mods I've made. I'll start over here. This is a spool holder. All this stuff pretty much is off Thingiverse in one way or another. There's a few things I've remixed or something, but most of them are just like this and just right off of Thingiverse. You can see there's little inserts for the hub that you can make in different sizes, and they just kind of clip on. There's a little lip down here in the corner that kind of grabs there, and as long as that bar that goes through the center is there, it holds pretty well. But if you take that bar off, it tends to want to fall off. So if you notice, there's a little bit of glue there. What I did is I rolled out just a little bit of blue tack and then flattened it out, stuffed it down there in the bottom with a screwdriver, and then when you jam it on, that blue tack grabs that sheet metal and it makes it hold a lot better. You know, you can still pull it off if you like, but if you don't make an effort, it's going to stay put, and that's good. Let's see, up here at the top, it's kind of a silly mod. Well, not really silly, but simple. Is the screws on the thing are really kind of cheap, especially these black screws that are up here. And so you may notice these are not stock because every time I take one out, I replace it with a better screw. I'd say about, probably 25% of them have stripped when they come out anyway, or showed signs of starting to strip at least. There's a few other simple mods here. There's a little tool holder. That's not really a big deal. Those magnets are on there, but I couldn't tell you why. They're just there. Place to store magnets. Sometimes I stick one of those Harbor Freight magnetic lights on here, so it's handy if you want to hold the light. There's a little filament guide there. Now you may notice, of course, the obligatory spinner, but you may notice the extruder is not the stock extruder. It's an aluminum MK8. It's also got this black piece here, which is for flexible filament. It's a guide for flexible filament. And there's a lock for the Bowden connector there. That has a lot more ability to pull than the other one, the stock one. It's also a much easier to load and unload. The only thing about this is the gear that's on that stepper motor is almost impossible to take off. And people say, well, if you heat it up with a blowtorch, well, I heated it up some, but probably not enough. And I finally gave up on it. So I kept the original gear. And what that means is the bearing that pinches the filament had to be replaced with something similar in size to the original. The good news is that means you don't have to recalibrate the extruder, which isn't that hard, but certainly made it easier. So that was a fairly cheap upgrade. On Hackaday.io, I have instructions on how to do that without disassembling the entire printer. There's a little trick to it, but it's not that hard to figure out. Oh, let's see. Moving down to the x-axis, you can see that's not the stock hot end at all. It's a clone E3D. There's another, you can kind of see it under there's another red Bowden lock there to keep you from accidentally releasing the Bowden tube. There's a silicon sock, and there's a fan that cools both the hot end and the part. If I want to print ABS, I just take that fan off and put the regular E3D type fan on there. This is one of those mounts for the E3D that, again, off Thingiverse, it's the zero offset one. It is a pain to install, but well worth it. This is, like I say, a really good upgrade for this. And what you'll see is that when you try to pull the belt down, if you take the whole thing apart, it's pretty easy to install. But if you don't want to take it apart, which I didn't, you can kind of loosen the belt, especially take the tensioner off, and get the bolts in there. But in my case, the bolts actually pinch a little bit of the belt. And that's not bad. I mean, the belt's supposed to move with the carriage anyway, so it's attached anyhow. So it's just basically making some more attachment points. Here, I'll remove this clip here. This just clips on, so you can see underneath there. But I mean, it's just the E3D. I did, in fact, take out the thermistor, so I didn't have to try to finagle with what kind of thermistor it wanted. It does have the newer firmware in it, so it has two choices, but only two. And it's got the same heating element as well, so I didn't cut that cable. I just pulled both of those out of the heat block. That is a new heat block that takes that silicon sock, or excuse me, silicone sock, this new heat break, new heat sink, and just mounts in there with no problem at all. This is the fan mount. This is a remix of the original. It's not mine though, but it's actually got little ears that engage in the heatsink, and so it makes it a lot more stable and able to. A little hard to do this while I'm holding the camera, and also it's really over on one side. I really should move the x-axis a little bit to do that, but yeah. Anyway, once it's on there, there it goes. Once it engages, it's on there pretty well. Now, you may notice the fan actually goes over to this connection, and I'll show you what that's about in a minute. And there's also a printed X-belt tensioner on here instead of the little stock springy one. And that works really well. It just takes a zip tie and it takes the tension out of the belt and it doesn't stretch like the spring. The wiring here goes over to the gantry support, and you can see that there's a rod there. There's a custom panel down at the bottom. I'll talk about that in a second. And that gives that gantry some support from shimmying too much over on that side. And if you follow that fan wire down on that custom panel, there's a fan with a little useless guard on it. That's a printed guard to cool the electronics. Now that only comes on when the extruder fan comes on, but I figure if you're not heating everything up, it probably isn't going to be a problem to keep the electronics cool. All that wiring goes back behind the panel, and what I did, I'll show you in a second. I had to do the belt freeing modification where you move the heated bed wires. I'll tell you why I had to do that in a second. But I routed the wires back around the bed. You can see them there going through that loom. And I just nibbled a piece out of that panel. So the panel didn't originally have that little opening there. I just nibbled it out. I may change that later. I did remix that panel because it's too big to print on the Mini itself, and my big printer was, let's just say, not operable at that time. Actually, it was operable, it just wasn't here. And so I split it in half, and that's up on Thingiverse under my ID, which is WD5GNR. And the halves are joined by the fan, so you pretty much have to have the fan on there unless you just want them flopping around. So that was convenient. So I may yet reprint that half to have a proper hole for the wires, although the way it is working fine. You can see there's cork under the bed. There's build tack on the bed, which I highly recommend. You can see the Kapton tape there's what's holding the cork on. The bed leveling screws, they're countersunk on the front, which those are just the stock bolts, although I'm getting ready to change them. But on the back, you'll see they're not. And back there, it's okay that they stick up a little bit because nothing really gets back there. But what happened is I had stripped one of the bolts. That E3D, you've got to drop the bed quite a bit. And when you do that, you wind up tightening those bolts down, and it stripped one of the heads. Well, in order for me to get it off with the spring completely compressed, I had to take the whole bed assembly off. So while I was at it, I went ahead and did the fix for the wires where you route them through the back. And that's why I was forced to do that. I had to cut the wires anyway, so I figured if I'm doing all that, I might as well route them in a better way. I'm sure you've seen on the internet there's a lot of reasons why that's not good, the way they're routed in the stock machine. There's also a Y-belt tensioner similar to the X-belt tensioner that I printed. And you can see it does pretty good work. That's just some gold PLA. The insides there are some light support material that I'll have to remove when I pull it off the bed. But you can see it's pretty good. And of course, I also have the obligatory knob because the stock knob is terrible. So everybody prints a knob. I actually have a couple of different ones. That one happens to be the one that's on right now. So overall, it's a lot of mods, but none of them were really complicated. Very few of them required taking the printer apart. And, you know, routing the bed wires, that was probably the biggest disassembly job. But almost everything else was maybe take a bolt out or two. Nothing major, not having to take the case apart and the tower apart and things like that. And like I say, you know, results are pretty good for a cheap printer. So anyway, just thought that might be useful to somebody. And If you got any questions, drop me a note.